everyone. Welcome to Spirit Switchboard. I'm your host, Carrie Lynn Shellhorn, and you are listening to us live on the United Public Radio Network and the UFO Paranormal Radio Network, 105.3 in the Gulf Coast and 107.7 FM in New Orleans. I am out of town, folks. I am in Ottawa for Matt Anderson this weekend, so I am on location out of town. And it's actually nice to be back because I have not been feeling well. So, I haven't been with Laura Lee on our Thursday show, Beneath the Hollow Moon. So I'm glad to be feeling better. I didn't want to miss the concert, didn't want to miss tonight, didn't want to miss tonight's guests. So we're just going to see how it rolls. I know that there's a little bit of a lag for me, but we're gonna make it work tonight. Well, you guys have plans this weekend? It's Family Day weekend here too. I didn't realize that at the time, so it is crazy here in Ottawa this weekend. And Friday the 13th. Which I also wasn't thinking about when I was wanting to come to Ottawa this weekend. So crazy. So folks, we did it. I put a poll up. And I just want to read the poll. Our guest tonight, I'll read you his bio. So David Sloan is Key West-based author, publisher, tour producer, and paranormal researcher, known for his long-running work on Florida Keys hauntings and Dolltender for Robert the Doll. Hi, Michelle Luce. He founded Phantom Press and is credited with creating one of Key West's earliest ghost tour operations. Sloan is the author of multiple haunted history titles, including works focused on Robert the Doll and Key West lore. And he currently leads Robert-focused experiences through his Key West tour brand. So we did the polls, and it was interesting, the polls. Not just about his thoughts on Robert the Doll, which most people, said that they were open-minded and kind of undecided about Robert. But when I asked what were the things that you most wanted to hear about, I want to remove from stuff. So it was the history, which I appreciate that you guys wanted to hear, because that's what I want to hear about too, is the history and having haunted dolls in our house. I know how we treat them, how we interact them, and you get to know them because there is a personality attached to them. And so interesting how people come into, and our dolls are not as famous as Robert, but how those interactions change when different personalities come in the house. And so I'm glad that you guys, when we did that poll, you were on board with wanting to know some of the same things that I was wanting to know as well. So I'm going to bring David out. Welcome to the show, David.
Thank you. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me, Carolyn.
On Friday the 13th.
On Friday the 13th, it couldn't be a more perfect day.
I think so too. And I think the collective energy creates it to be, amped up and a little more palpable, right?
Yeah. And I'm excited to talk about the history too.
Well, that's, I love history and just Key West, the history and the folklore attached to Key West. So there's so much that we could get into today. I just want to bring up some of the folks that are chiming in. See if we can get that to pop up. Hi, Michelle. Carrie Fast is chiming in from Calgary. Thanks so much for being here, Carrie. Hi, Mort. Thank you for being here. Contessa, thank you so much for being here.
Hi, Contessa.
Mish is chiming in from Australia.
All right. Australia. Yeah. Great.
That's amazing. And Mish's, I always get excited when our Michelles show up in the chat, because our Michelles are very fast with their humor. And it's Valentine's. Oh, it's Valentine's. Yeah, because you're a day ahead, so it's already Valentine's Day. So happy Valentine's Day, Michelle.
Oh, wow. Friday the 13th and Valentine's Day happening at the same time.
Well, I this is the first year I didn't do a lot of posts, like supernatural posts and posting with the hashtag stupid Cupid. So normally I do a lot of like the stupid Cupid posts leading up to this. But one of the things, like when I reached out to you about coming on the podcast, besides just the history of Robert the Doll, the other part that really drew me was who you are not. When I was looking on the website, who you are not, and why people need to, who you are, longest running, family owned, giving back into the community, honoring the history, and all of that stuff is very important to me and the work that I do. So it was just, it is interesting in the age that we are in now, when there's so many pop-ups and people grifting off of something that we already have that's established, that we've worked so hard to put together, right? And I love how you approach that on your website, and working with integrity, right?
Yeah, that's what I've always tried to do. I feel I'm very honored that Key West kind of chose me, and that I've been able to be here for 30 years now. And,
Yeah.
because it's a very interesting island and it's a very special place. And I really do feel like I was led here. And I feel like the things that have happened were, I showed up and I tuned in, but, these are things that I can't take credit for. So I always try to give back to the island, and,
It's amazing.
and do that through nonprofits, or through, volunteering, and trying to bring attention to these places.
I love it. And that's a very big part for me and work as well too, because I just feel so blessed to be able to do what I've been doing for almost 20 years. So giving back is so important. Do you remember just prior to the show, I was talking about, I had posted and I was starting to receive letters from people who had Robert experiences.
Yes.
Right. So this was Randy. So it was Randy Zahara. He's saying, hi, Carolyn and David. We did the Haunted Key West tour with David in 2000. Hi from Sandy and Randy. So he was the first one that sent his Robert. Yeah, he was the first one that sent his Robert story to me about the fabulous time that they had, but kind of going in as a skeptic and poking and not asking for permission, and what happened with this camera immediately. So he's it was immediate. It went up and I started getting emails right away.
Great.
So you see that all the time.
I can't wait to hear it. Yeah, we see the letters. I see the letters that come in to the fort, and Robert gets a few letters a day sometimes, and it's interesting because you often hear about the bad ones, the apologies and the things like that. I think they're actually outnumbered by the good ones. The people who go in there and they love Robert's energy, and they'll send him cards saying, "Hey, Robert, nothing bad happened. I just want to say thank you. I think you're very cute." So there really are some good ones, and occasionally you get some that are very disturbing, where people are begging for a curse to be removed. But I think it's important for people to understand that what's out there about Robert the Doll on the internet, extremely exaggerated. And if you look at the course of Robert's rise, when I first started researching him, he was not an evil doll.
Yeah.
They called him the enchanted doll. And I mean, he did these things that dolls don't do normally. There were the stories about him doing things, but through the years, those stories turned from him being a doll possessed with an entity that was mischievous to a doll that will kill you. And people are now apologizing when they see his photograph online. And I think that's interesting because one of the things with ghosts, the stories that we tell very much reflect us as a society. And if people are afraid of looking at a photograph of Robert online, that's part of the natural progression of how things go. And I think it is a good reflection on us. But if you do look back, I mean, I don't think there's anything to fear with Robert. I always preach respect, but it's a really
Right.
interesting story, and we can get more into that too.
Yeah. So let's start with Dolltender, right? Let's
Yes.
start with
Yes.
like how you so what it actually is day to day versus what people perceive it to be.
Right. So one thing I want to clear up, I don't own Robert the doll. Robert
Yeah.
is owned by a nonprofit museum. And what happened when I came to Key West, I came here to start a ghost tour in 1996. And ghost tours were not a thing anywhere in the United States. There might have
Right.
been one or two. And I was down here. I looked around Key West for almost 2 weeks trying to find ghosts, and nobody had any stories. I went to the library. I couldn't find anything. I got to where I was
Right.
going to the bars and tipping the bartenders really well and saying, "Is this the haunted bar?" And they say, "No." And I said, "Oh, which one is the one with the ghost in it?" And they'd say, "I've never heard of any ghosts." So Key West was a very different place. And that was also a time when people weren't as likely to speak about ghosts because
Right.
people think they're crazy. So I was getting ready to leave Key West because I couldn't find anything. And I had my car loaded up. I'd quit my job managing cruise ships. So I really didn't know what I was going to do with my life. And I get lost and I'm frustrated. Key West is a small place. I don't know how I got lost. And I was just so full of emotion. And then I almost got in an accident. Then I hear this voice in the passenger seat as if someone was there. They said, "Go back to the library." And I said, "I don't know where the library is." And I turned to look and nobody's there. And I saw a sleeve. That's all I got was a glimpse of a sleeve. And it was like a tweed jacket. I'm like, that's
Right.
weird. See, wearing a long sleeve jacket in Key West. But then I look up and there's a sign that says library parking only. So I pulled into the spot and I'd been to the library, I think 3 times. And each time, I looked through the card catalog. I asked the librarians, they couldn't find anything on ghosts. Well, this time I go into the Florida history room and there was an old man sitting in there. And he said, "Can I help you?" And he had never been there before. And I said, "Yes, I'm looking for a book on the ghosts of Key West." And he said, "Oh, there are none." I said, "Okay, well, thank you." And I started to walk out. And I was halfway out the door. And
Right.
then this guy changed my life. He said, "Wait a minute. We don't have any books, but we've got ghosts." And in the Florida history room, they have a giant walk-in vault. And this thing protects all of the Key West history from fires and hurricanes. And it's not accessible to the public. Okay. You have to talk to the historian and they go back there and
Right.
come back out with whatever you're looking for. So he comes out with this folder a couple inches thick, full of newspaper clippings from the past 50 years about the hauntings in Key West. And I got to tell you, I mean, it was like I struck gold. That moment changed my life forever. If he
Right.
if he hadn't said wait, if he hadn't felt like talking that day, who knows where I'd be or what I'd be doing.
Right.
But I plotted everything out on the map, and there was nothing about Robert that I found in those in those first articles. Uh,
Right.
but there was an article about a ghost of Ann Otto, and it said that Ann Otto haunts the Artist House Bed and Breakfast. So I went and I knocked on the door of the Artist House Bed and Breakfast, and the owner at the time, his name was Daryl Meyer, and Daryl had owned the place for probably more than a decade. Which was really nice about Key West at the time. The people had been there for a long time and had stories. And so I told Daryl, I said, "Hey, I'm here to talk to you about your ghosts. I'm starting something called a ghost tour." And he said, "Oh, you want to hear about Robert the doll?" And I said, "No, I want to hear about your ghost. I want to hear about Ann Otto." And he goes, "Oh, you want to hear about Robert the doll?" And, and I thought this guy was like a doll collector or something. And I'm like, I'm like, well, no, I'm really more interested in the ghost stuff, but yeah, I mean, I'll listen. And he starts telling me the story about this doll that used to come to life, and about the little boy who was the constant companion. And I'm listening to this story thinking, oh my God, this guy's crazy. And then he says, do you want to see the attic room where Robert used to live? And as soon as he said that, the phone flew off the hook, shot out towards us, bounces back. I look over at that because we were the only two in that
Yeah.
room. And he says, I think Robert's ready for you. And he starts going up the stairs. I follow him. This bookcase opened up and blocked me from going. And I kind of looked at him and he says, just close it. It's okay. And then we get up to the second floor and there's a smaller staircase leading up to a little hatch that leads to the attic. And he lets me go up first and push the hatch open. And I walk into this attic room and it was still furnished with Robert's little furniture from when the Ottos had owned the house.
Oh, I love that.
It had a little bench. It had two little chairs. There was a smaller table in the middle and it was set up for a tea party. And
My thing. Love
I
it.
know that. I know when you said that earlier, I'm like, oh, you're gonna love this. And it was an attic in a Key West house, so there was a warmth to it. But as he started telling the story, the energy changed. There was a point a few minutes into the story where the energy absolutely changed in that attic. And I thought I was going to be physically ill if I didn't get out of there. And I never felt energy like this. And I told him, I said, oh, thanks so much. I'm going to have to go. Where can I find the doll? And he said, well, he's up at the East Martello Museum, but he's not on display. And he said, you got to call if you want to see him. Now, Robert had been donated to the museum in 1994 by Myrtle Reuter, who was his, she started taking care of him after Gene Otto passed away. Excuse me. So they did not keep Robert on display, because as a museums, it wasn't cool to have paranormal. They thought it detracted from what they were doing.
Right.
So Robert was kept in the back, not talked about. Very few people in Key West even knew about Robert because he had been missing for so long. They talked about him when Gene Otto had him, but then when Myrtle Reuter had him, she moved after her divorce. She moved out of the Otto family home, and so Robert faded away. There's even a newspaper article that says that the doll disappeared. Some people think he's living in Stock Island, which is the next island up. But so Robert was very much off the radar. And I called the museum, I think 3 times to try to get an appointment to see him. Anybody who answered the phone had no interest. They're like, oh, no, not when I'm here. Call back tomorrow. You want to talk to so-and-so. You want to talk to Betty when she's working. And so I ended up, finally the curator, Stacy Rousseau, she said, yeah, I'll show you Robert. And so I went up there. And the East Martello Museum, it's an old Civil War fort built in 1862. It's this massive brick fortress. And at the time, the roof was leaking and they had all the windows open just to get a little bit of ventilation through there. So it was very, very dank and dusty. And nobody really went there. It's got different artifacts from Key West past, like, different things from the sponging industry and old Native American canoes. And so very creepy. When I go to the back, Stacy came out of the back office where Robert was stored, and she was carrying him in his chair, but she was cradling him like a baby and talking to him. And she says, Robert, this is David. He's starting something called a ghost tour, and he wants to take some photographs of you. And I look at Stacy, I'm like, oh, wow, she's crazy too. So Stacy puts Robert on this big table and sets him down, and she says, all right, I'll come back and check on you in a little bit. And she leaves, and I'm alone in this room. It felt like I was alone in the entire fort with the doll, and I didn't feel anything. Robert he looked a little creepy because he's the size of a small child. He's about 3.5, 4 feet tall, and he has a felt face, but he was eaten by termites, so he's got little holes throughout the felt, and it makes him look almost like a burn victim. And I
Right.
snapped a few photographs of him, and I wanted to get a photo of him without his hat because he used to have a hat that it was still a sailor's hat, but the brim was down and it covered a lot of his face.
So is it true that the clothes belong to Jean
That's
Otto?
true. Yep, that's very true. When Robert was first crafted, well, I'm getting ahead of myself there. I'll
Sorry.
tell you. I'll fill you in
I
on.
won't ask the questions then.
Yeah,
I'll be patient.
but with Robert, so I went to take the hat off of his head. As I leaned in, as soon as I touched the brim of his hat and lifted it up, the doll came alive. And the energy changed. I was no longer alone in that room. I could see a gleam in his eyes. And I was looking at it and I'm like, whoa, this is not the doll that I was looking at 5 seconds ago. And after the shock sunk in for a couple seconds, I said, oh, let me get a picture of the difference. And I held up the camera and snapped a picture and the camera didn't work. I tried a second time and a third time, nothing. I go to look at it to see if there's something with the settings or something's wrong. It took 3 pictures of my face, flash, flash, flash. And then, so I turn around again and try another one. Camera wouldn't work. And then I hear a child giggle and the energy leaves. Now, the energy that I felt when he arrived was the same as what I felt in the attic at the artist house. And when I looked at that and what happened, I looked and I said, oh my God, I've got to find out what makes this doll tick. And the important thing to understand is at the time, all we really knew about Robert were pretty much legends. And the most common legend, if you take everything people were saying, people said it was created by an angry nanny and given to the little boy as, as revenge on the family. And apart from that, nobody knew anything. Okay. There were different stories about what he'd do, but there was a lot of uncertainty about Robert. And I think probably might have been another 8 or 9 years went by before I really made another big break in the case. I started, I was doing the ghost tours. I'd send people up to the museum and I'd say, call them, ask them to bring Robert out, ask them to bring Robert out. So in 1996, they did bring him out and they put him in a case with other Key West characters. So he shared with the iguana man and the cookie lady. And it was just a little case. It didn't lock. You could have slid it right open and touched Robert and, shake his hand. People in the museum started having crazy stuff happening. And one of the common things was batteries would drain. And, this was with cameras then, before people had cell phones. So because of all these batteries draining and then people taking photographs, when they got their film developed, none of their pictures in Key West would turn out except Robert the doll.
That's funny.
Yeah. And, back then you had a roll of film. So you'd take 24 pictures in Key West.
Right.
And there was a film developing guy here, one of the photomats, and he started asking people if they had been to see the doll because his equipment would get stuck on Robert pictures and just print until he ran out of paper or ink.
So Randy Zahara, the fellow that had to mention taking your tour,
Yes.
He sent me his story. I need to see if I can find it, call it up really quickly. But he talked about he was sent to a printing place to get his camera looked at, and they knew exactly where he had been and why he was there with his camera. So maybe it was the same printing place, like the camera place, because the dude knew exactly where he had been and what he had been doing.
Yep, that's yeah. Everybody knows, and it's interesting because with the photos, so many people started having issues with cameras, and that's how the legend started that you're supposed to ask permission from Robert. Okay, but it's a human legend because of the camera problems. Somebody's said, "Oh, be careful," Robert messes with your cameras, and then somebody else says, "Oh, maybe we should ask permission." And
Right.
then that became the thing. And when the trolleys were going up there, they put it on the wall and said, "Don't forget, you have to ask Robert permission." Um, that's one of the things I love to dispel. I recommend not asking Robert for permission, because think about it, when you're dealing with an entity, if you ask permission, you're putting yourself below them. You're giving them the power.
That's right.
And it's better to keep it on an even and respectful level. And the other thing, I talk to so many people, and they say, I didn't ask Robert permission, and nothing happened to me. I'll say, well, of course not. You were probably respectful, and when you ask permission, it's not like Robert's going to nod his head. Yes, you can do that. Sure. How are people going to know?
Yeah.
So asking permission, it's a cool legend. It's one that's never going to die. But it really has nothing to do with whether or not Robert's going to curse you. Robert's not going to curse you for not asking for a photo. What tends to happen, people who are disrespectful have the issues. And the disrespect could be thinking that they're supposed to ask permission and saying, I'm not going to ask permission. Boom. But more often, it's people flipping Robert off, challenging Robert. It's not like you're going to walk into the museum and suddenly be cursed by this doll. You have to go out of your way to be an unkind human to this artifact and the spirits inside of it.
And that always surprises me, because even if you're going into a haunted location, it's that spirit's place, and you don't know the story, what the triggers are, what was there before. Like, going in with that kind of intention, you're already, and if you think about all of us being connected as part of that collective consciousness of one, they're already picking up before you get there what kind of person you are. And they're ready for you.
Yep. Yeah. And it's interesting to see how the human energy can impact things, because I've led thousands of tours with Robert the doll, and you can always tell if someone doesn't have the good energy. One of the things that I do, I've got this little ball. It's a little toy ball that's slightly deflated, and I'll put it on the case, right on Robert's case, and I'll put it on the edge, because I have my back to him when I'm talking. So I tell him, I say, "Hey, Robert, if you ever don't like anyone or don't like something going on in here, push that ball to let me know." And in the last 5 years I've been doing that, it's only been pushed 13 times. But the times that it's happened, I always know who it's going to go for, and he usually rolls the ball right towards them. One night we had a real jackass, and they sat towards the back though, and I'm thinking, oh, how's Robert going to get the ball to them? And then right when we were about to finish the tour, I thought, I guess he's not going to do it. And then the person sitting right up front close to the case, they crossed their leg, the ball went down, hit their toe, and ricocheted back and landed right in front of the
That's funny. Do they realize that they're being called out?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
That is interesting. And it matters. Like, our intention matters, how we're interacting. And it's Robert's home, and it's his space. Like, so why would you want to go in having that kind of attitude? Sometimes the skeptics can ask different questions, like from a different perspective. So sometimes on investigations, it's interesting, the types of questions, but it's the attitude or the intention and the way that they're asking the question that can create the turn of events, right?
Yeah. And I welcome skeptics. I love it when skeptics come on the tour. It's just, I always tell people, hey, keep an open mind. Because that's good energy. It's usually if someone is, if there's a family and, one of them got dragged along, that can make a big difference when that person is just a little, what's Rainey saying? I didn't mean to be poke my finger through the glass at Robert, as I didn't really believe he was anything but a doll at the time, but I would not make the same mistake again. Robert's very forgiving. Yeah. Robert's very forgiving and very playful as well. It's interesting because, with Robert, I kept trying to find so much information, and I spent It's amazing how much time I spend researching dolls. I'm sure I have a very interesting Google search profile, whatever they're looking at for what I am. But then I saw, and I hired doll experts to try to identify him. Nobody could. And then,
Really?
yep, nobody could figure out what kind of doll he was, and they all thought he was handmade by a nanny. So I came across a photograph of a doll once online, and I looked at the stitching on the face, and I thought, oh my God, that's Robert's stitching. I'm like, whoa, 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 this looks a lot like Robert. And I found out what kind of doll that was, and it was a Steiff doll. And then I look up the Steiff company. Steiff was actually famous because they invented the teddy bear. And
Oh,
they're a company in Germany, and they're known for their quality products. The thing with the Steiff dolls, they identify themselves by putting a button in the ear that says Steiff on it. Dolls like Robert that are played with, how do you think a kid carries a doll around? Grabs it by the hand, grabs it by the ear,
yeah.
right? So a doll that's been played with, Robert lost both of his ears. Both of his ears are transplants.
Oh,
So, so, so identifying him as a Steiff doll was huge. A lot of people didn't like it because they liked the legend about the angry nanny that
right.
went with Robert. A lot of people don't want these. A lot of people prefer a good story over the truth. But if you dig deep enough, the truth is usually stranger.
Well, it's an even better story for sure. It's an
Yeah.
even better story. And the getting to the story is a story in itself. Like
Mm-hmm.
getting the history is its own amazing story.
Yeah. And it's really cool. You had mentioned about Robert being a sailor, and that uniform used to belong to the little boy, Gene Otto. What I discovered as well is that Robert was originally a clown. He was
Really?
part, yeah, yeah, he was part, they called him a harlequin, which he was part of. They did some circus animals and, well, circus puppets. And uh, the thing about Robert, he's a very rare size. So he was probably intended to be in the window of like an FAO Schwartz or a big toy company, and there would have been little Steiff dolls all around him. So that would have drawn people in, and then they would have seen the little ones. But when you look at the Otto family history, the Gene Otto, the boy's grandfather, he came over from Germany, and um, so there's the strong German family ties, and they
Right.
trace their lineage back to Otto the Great. And I found letters where they talked about exchanging gifts with family from Germany. So we think that the mother probably brought the doll back from Germany.
Right.
Either way, we figured 1904. That's the number that I always went with. I went to Germany last year, and I was able to confirm the 1904 date for his construction. So
That's pretty exciting.
yeah, I mean, it was amazing. I was able to go into the factory where they made the doll. I mean, they
That's
have a
exciting.
really cool museum with the different Steiff creations on display and a timeline. But the director of Steiff America was over there at the same time, and so he took me back for a factory tour, which is very rare. And for me, it was pretty magical to be able to stand in that building where Robert was
Right.
created.
That's amazing. Do they have like photos in the factory, like a history timeline within the factory or anything like
No,
that?
no, they've preserved the exterior of the building that they called the Virgin Aquarium, and because it was a pretty innovative as far as cooling and temperature control, but it was all
Right.
glass windows, but they were double layered, and all the young girls in the town used to work in there, so all the guys would go and look in there, and that's how it got its name.
Funny.
But um, but the inside is more modern, where they still do some of their special editions and things like that. So it's set up like a factory, and you can see that the people lined up and using the modern sewing machines to do everything. And what they did is in the Steiff Museum, they have exhibits of what the equipment was that they used and the different tools that they used and the different materials that they used.
Right.
So it's all very fascinating. And the
So
materials
with
play a big role in Robert. So
So that was I was going to ask. Is he stuffed with? Was he stuffed with straw? What was he stuffed with?
He's stuffed with Excelsior, and Excelsior is like a tightly spun wood wool, and
Okay.
and uh, there's a very interesting story attached to that. But again, I don't want to get too far ahead of
Okay.
his story.
I won't throw you off the timeline. I
so,
won't
so
throw
check
you
this
off.
out. So after I found out that Robert was a Stife, and I'm researching the Otto family, and I'm finding certain things out there. But then I came across a photograph of Jean and Anne from their wedding, and it was one that I had never seen. And so I asked the person who had that. I said, where did you find that photo? I said, I've gone through everything, and she said, oh, it's in the Otto box in the library vault. And I said, wait, what Otto box? And she said, oh, there's a few boxes back there in the back of the vault. And I had talked with the historian hundreds of times, and he never mentioned that there was an Otto box in the back. So I
Well, I
don't even know.
suppose you didn't ask either.
Well, but when I asked him, he said, oh yeah, there might be something. Well, it turns out that Anne Otto was a librarian for a time at the Key West
Wow.
Library. So after her husband had died, she took all of their family archives and she put them in that vault in the library. And there were about 5 boxes, and they had photos from when Jean was a kid. They had letters between family members. When Jean and Anne lived in France, there were letters back and forth. And, this is in the old cursive handwriting. It could take an hour to read a letter. And there were hundreds of letters, but I went through and I read through every single document in all of these books and or in all these letters and all these boxes. So I found through that, I found Emmeline Abbott was the name of their nanny.
That's a
And
pretty name. Doesn't sound like an angry
no,
sounding.
it's a beautiful name.
Yeah.
And it seems like the family absolutely loved Emmeline. I mean, her husband, when the Ottos lost one of their sons, um, Emmeline's husband was the manservant for Jean's grandfather. Okay.
Right.
Um, he went across the country to bring the body back.
Oh,
I mean, there was a close bond between all of them. And so the angry thing didn't make sense. But then in a newspaper, I found notice of a lawsuit where this was after Jean's father had passed, where Emmeline Abbott filed a lawsuit against the estate. And we don't know what it was for. And then there are letters between Jean's mother and Jean's sister. And Jean's sister is saying, don't you worry about Emmeline. She's not going to get one red penny out of you. So there's talk about that. So there was a rift at some point, and I don't know
right.
what that rift was. There's speculation. There's speculation that Jean's father might have been with her, and there might have been a child involved. What I did find, I mean, but to me, that's the evidence that she was the angry nanny.
Right.
But only angry after with that lawsuit. But I looked at the
And how
census.
old would Jean have been at that point?
By the time the lawsuit happened, I think that was I want to say that was in like 26, and Jean was born in I think 1900. So he would have been a young man by then. He was off in France at the
Right.
time.
So by the
And
time she was an angry nanny, the timeline would be off for him receiving a cursed doll.
yeah, so that doesn't fit. But the interesting thing is, I looked at census records and found that in 1900, in the census, Emmeline Abbott had no children living, no children deceased. In 1910, she had no children living, one child deceased. So in
Oh,
that same time period that Robert the Doll arrived, she lost a child. And I
interesting.
believe that child spirit is one of the dominant spirits inside of Robert the Doll.
Interesting.
Yeah, and we don't know her name. I call her Abby, like ABI, because her last name was Abbott, and I
Right.
thought I thought she should have a name. It was interesting, and that's the one that I've always tried to nurture and tried to take care of. The You can see the doll behind me. That's the one that I call Abby now. When Robert the doll and I were grand marshals for the Fantasy Fest parade in Key West. It's kind of like the Mardi Gras that we have down here.
Fun.
And you know, the museum protects the artifact, and I take care of the paranormal side of things and deal with the spirits. So obviously Robert's too fragile, not going to go out in a crowd of 80,000 people and ride in a casket with me down Duval Street.
Right.
So I created this doll for several reasons. I wanted to see what it was like to make a doll like that. And I used the same materials as best I could. And then for strictly for media, we, for the, promotions for the parade, we took the replica in to film something where I was inviting the spirit of Robert the doll to come on the parade in the stunt double.
Right.
And so we were in there and we were filming it. And I tell you, as soon as I did that, and I was very sincere, I invited Abby to come with me. And I said, hey, it's a parade. I think you'd really enjoy it. It's pretty cool. You can come into this doll. I made it to look just like you. And then I'll bring you back afterwards. And you can either stay here or you can go back to where you are. And I felt the doll get heavier. I mean, significantly heavier. And I could feel a presence in it. And there was a guy standing there who didn't know about Robert. He didn't know much about the museum, and he's kind of watching. He's like, what are y'all doing? And I said, do you want to hold her? He said, I don't know what it is, but sure. And he took her and held her, and he teared up. And he had all these emotions come out, and he released this childhood trauma that he had. And when he gave her back, he said, I have no idea what just happened there. He said, that was incredible.
Yeah. It's
So
interesting how people can, like, the energy. I don't think people realize that they carry their energy, like how their energy comes into the space before they do. Physically, you come in second. Your energy enters the room first, right?
yeah,
And
yeah,
they will have those reactions.
yeah. Denise is just pointing out. Denise
But
says, I don't know if it's been mentioned earlier that Robert is behind you. Where? Yeah. So that is Abby, and it's pretty fascinating. With Abby, after the parade, I kept her around for a little bit because I look and I think, okay, if there's a little girl spirit, she doesn't want to have people coming into the museum doing the same thing, gawking, taking pictures. They'd want some type of mental stimulation, right? So I tried taking her around with me, and just as kind of an experiment. And then I had a friend who said, "Hey, I've got some friends in town, and they really want to see Robert the doll. Would you be willing to give them a private tour?" And I said, "Yeah, okay." And I brought Abby back to the museum, and there's a portion of the museum where we have a tunnel. We call it the Yellow Fever Tunnel, and I placed her beside it. And then when these people showed up, one of them, Joe, she told me, she said, I'm very sensitive to spirits, but I'm just learning how to control my abilities. I'm still nurturing them. And she said, so bear with me. And I said, yeah, of course. We go back. She was getting so many things where she was just tuned in just right to them. And then she goes down the Yellow Fever Tunnel, and I see her get down, swoops down low, and she starts talking like she's talking to a child. And I looked and I said to Corey, who was with her, I said, I'll be damned. I said, she's talking to the little girl. What's the little girl doing in the tunnel? And then Joe came up, and I said, what were you doing? She said, I was talking to a little girl. And I looked over and I realized that I brought Abby back up there.
Interesting.
So, yeah, so there's some really incredible stuff. But getting back to the autos, those letters and everything that we found in the library, through those, I was able to get such a complete picture of the Otto family. You know, the relationships between Jean and Anne and Jean's mother and Jean's father and everybody involved. And I think that's so important in trying to understand what's really going on. You know, like I spent thousands of hours going through every document in there, reading them and rereading them, and just picking out little bits and pieces. And you know, they said that Jean was cruel to Anne, and that through time evolved into he used to beat her to a pulp, you know. But so I don't think there was physical violence, mental cruelty without doubt. But what I found was that when he died, he had written her out of the will, and she had given
Oh,
up her life for him. So she was very bitter at the end. And so that was the abuse that they talk about. You know, they say he used to push her into one of the closets too,
wow.
and hold the door and say, "I didn't do it. Robert did it." But you know, I talked to so many people who were involved, people who were close to them. I talked to the guy who bought the house from Anne, and he wishes he had burned Robert the doll. He hates what Robert has done to his friend's legacy because Gene was a great artist, Anne was a great concert pianist, and you rarely hear about that. It might be mentioned as one small line, but then it's on to how they were crazy and lived with a doll. But I did ask him. I said, was Robert in the house? He said, "Oh, I should have burned that doll." And I said, "Well, what did you know about it?" He said, "Oh, it was sitting in a cedar chest in Jean's bedroom because Jean and Anne had separate bedrooms." And he's he said the guy's name's Bill Geiser. He said I asked Anne. I said, "Oh, does Robert come with the house too?" And Anne said, "I hate that effing doll." Uh, it was Jean's best friend. Of course, he never could make any friends of his own.
Wow.
And that was interesting because that's good confirmation that Anne did indeed hate the doll, and
Yeah.
there and that there was indeed this stuff going on with Robert into Jean's old age.
So there are there not stories that he would walk around and talk to the doll openly as an adult as well too, right?
There are those stories, but you know, finding witnesses to those stories, you
Right.
know, most of those stories ended up coming out later on. You know, people take different liberties, you know,
Right.
and and I'm not going to call out any of the shows. They know who they are, but a
Mhm.
lot of them like inserting their own facts. You know, they like inserting. Um, you know, they make up an aunt who did something. They make up a daughter who didn't exist. Uh, they fabricate these things to try to tell a better story, and all they're doing
Right.
is spreading more misinformation. But you know, I mean, I find with ghost stories, there are people who believe in the paranormal, and there's people who don't. And there's definitely a place for paranormal entertainment. You know, I mean, I think everybody loves a good ghost story, so there's nothing
Right.
wrong with that. But when they, you know, sometimes there's that blend because I do love history and I do believe in the hauntings. I'm amazed at how many people in the field will tell these stories and do something, and they don't believe in the paranormal at all, and they'll turn around and they'll kind of laugh at it. And it's funny as time goes on to see how many people are kind of laughing behind my back, like, "Oh, the paranormal." And I feel sorry for them that they haven't experienced what's out there because
Well,
there's some interesting stuff.
it makes life magical, honestly, and it changes what you feel is important as well too. Like where you put value to things also
Yeah,
changes.
yeah.
Um, and I liked that you used the word entertainment as well too. If they said it was entertainment, then it would also educate people differently about how to do investigations and how to properly investigate and the research part and the historical part that's important. Did you want me
Yeah,
to read Randy's? We can bring Randy's up and
that's
you
what I'm
can give
reading.
me
Yeah,
yeah. We'll bring it up and read it. Um, I don't know, Randy. You might have to finish that last little bit there. But Randy is sharing the next time we were in Key West around 2005, our 14-year-old daughter had a new digital camera that worked perfectly. As a rebellious teen, she did not pay Robert the respect that perhaps she should have. And after she took his picture, she could no longer scroll chronologically back through her photos. When she tried to review a recent picture, they would show up randomly, sometimes being the third last picture she took, and sometimes the first picture she would see would be from 1 week prior.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. That's very cool.
Mary Jane is saying you have to be open to experience it as well too.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I find I don't know, when you have open-minded skeptics, they can have that experience. But over time, that experience happens more if they're hanging around you more. Like I know people that have been around me at different places saying that they didn't believe, but then there was just no option. Like there's no explanation. We can left brain it. It's not electrical. It's not an air draft. It's not these things. So the unexplained makes life magical.
Yeah. Yeah. And, I find it interesting because, science is so far from catching up with the human experience. It tries, but it's regularly proved wrong. And, we're still learning. So science is still trying to catch up to what we experience as humans. It can't explain how our brains work. It can't explain how our bodies work. And it tries and it gets better and better. But there is so much out there.
Thanks for sharing, Carrie. Unbelief is a demon in itself to block the open mindset. I'm just going to do our station ID really quick, and then we can pop back in.
Great.
And hear more. So thanks, everybody. If you are just chiming in or just listening in, you're listening to Spirit Switchboard, and I'm your host, Carrie Lynn Shellhorn, and you are listening to us live on the United Public Radio Network and the UFO Paranormal Radio Network, 105.3 in the Gulf Coast and 107.7 FM in New Orleans. If you're interested in learning more about the hosts and shows that UPRN has to offer, you can head to uprntalkradio.com. There is all of our shows. There's thousands of archives, and there's always new shows coming on the network. And there's something for everyone. It's not all high strangeness and paranormal, though we do love our high strangeness and paranormal here. Tonight we have David L. Sloan. He is Dolltender researcher, historian, tour producer. Author. There's so many hats, David, that you wear.
Yeah.
And we're talking about.
I started calling myself Dolltender because, it's like I'm not the doll owner. I don't think the doll can be owned. Like I said, the museum takes care of the artifact, but I really do tend to the spirits within Robert. And there are multiple spirits in there. It's not just the little girl. I used to think it was just one spirit. And then, through time, I identified more. And, some people, Cindy Kaza, she says she thinks that there's a portal inside of Robert. And I believe it.
Right.
But I try to tend to the spirits, and I try to honor all the spirits. That's why I call myself a Dolltender.
I love it. I love that that's what you call. And again, it shows respect, right? It's showing, where you feel your place is in the story.
Yeah.
Randy's continuing. Sometimes the first picture she would see would be from a week or two previously. For the next 4 months, she had to download her camera pictures onto a laptop so that she could review them properly. Around 4 months after she'd taken Robert's picture in Key West, we were at a family reunion in BC, Canada, and Stephanie wanted to take a picture from a cousin of hers, but it was out of memory, so she deleted several pictures that she knew she already had saved on the laptop. And one of them happened. So I guess Randy's having to do this in little snippets. So we'll get the next snippet.
Yeah. It's interesting. I like the theory about there being multiple entities within Robert. The way I like to describe it, I think one of the predominant spirits is the little girl there, the daughter of Emmeline Abbott. So I think Abby is a strong spirit. I think these other ones there's two that are definitely protectors, and so many people have reported feeling them. They're like 8 feet tall. They're dark shadows, and they seem to lurk around Robert's case. And I think they're there to watch. And if somebody comes in and disrespects the little girl, um,
Mm.
then they're like, boom. And I think they'll either attach themselves to that person, or maybe one of the spirits comes out of the portal and attaches to that person. And then they follow that person home, and they cause those issues, being struck by lightning, finding dead deer in their yard, getting locked in a basement, the different things that people report. And I think that's why multiple people can have problems at the same time, because the one will be out there and then somebody else is disrespectful. Boom, there's another one coming out of the portal to follow them. But the other thing I found, people who apologize, people who say, hey, I messed up, almost all the time, things that were going bad will stop.
Interesting. Carrie's asking, has Robert been unstuffed either to refurbished or look to see if there's an item in there to attach energy to this doll?
No, because he's an artifact and the museum is charged with preserving him, there's no interest in looking inside of Robert. We did an examination at one point because I wanted to look for any identifying marks on him. So they did a full examination and and looked all over, but they don't want to cut him open. We had talked about X-raying him. They don't want to do that either, because people have talked about maybe there's a soul stone or something like that.
Right.
But we do know, if you look at the holes in his face and the places where his ears were, and even on his fingers, you can look inside and you can see that he is stuffed with Excelsior, and that's the wood
Right.
wool that was put in there by the Steiff company in Germany. I believe that his core may be stuffed with kapok, which is something that Steiff used during different time periods. Kapok, it's this nice fluffy material. It comes from the kapok tree, which is a sacred tree. They say that the roots go to the underworld and that the branches go up to the heavens, and that spirits travel through this kapok tree. And they also use the fluffy stuff in life preservers. They used to use it for as a flotation device.
Interesting.
There's this really cool kapok tree in front of the courthouse in Key West. They used the kapok trees in Santeria to communicate with the saints and to make offerings for the saints. I think that's why it's in front of courthouses in different places. But again, I think that's another magical element. And I'm going to tell you something that kind of blew my mind. So the way I look at my journey with Robert, there was the mystery of Robert the doll, trying to find out what was making this doll tick. Then there was the possession of Robert the doll, where I was having all types of issues when trying to find it out, diving deep into what made him tick. And then the magic of Robert the doll, and that's the phase that I'm in now. When I was talking about Joe and Corey being at the museum and Joe picking up on the little girl, she called me the next morning and she said, I had a visitor last night. And I said, okay, tell me. And she described a creature that looked somewhat like Gollum from Lord of the Rings. And she said, Corey was up and, he was peeing, he was in the bathroom. And she said that this creature came over and she felt it climb on top of her in the bed. And I said, she told me what it looked like. And I said, anything else? And she described the sound that it made. And I got chills because I had taken a vacation. My wife and I were following in my great grandfather's Civil War trail. And I've never had so many things go wrong in my life. I felt like I was cursed. Things, and I blow most things off. This was so much bad stuff. My wife ended up leaving early. She's like, I can't do this anymore. And I really wanted to get to one cemetery in Pensacola. So
Right.
powered through. After I did that, so much was still going wrong. And finally, something was the straw that broke the camel's back. And I said, that's it. And I was going to turn in the rental car and I booked a flight home. The second that I did that, I felt this release where it was like, whoa. And I didn't quite know what it was. And it was almost like I drifted off to sleep, but I didn't. And then I thought I was having a heart attack. And I shot up from the bed and I clutched my heart. I turned over on my right hand side and and this thing slid out of me. It was like it was shaped to the shell of my body, like, but smaller than me on the inside. And it was transparent and it looked like Gollum. And it slid across the bed and it looked back at me and it looked surprised. It was like shocked that it was leaving me. And the sound that it made was the exact same sound that Joe made. Now, when I tried to figure out what it was, and I did not talk about this, it sounds it sounds insane. So I didn't tell many people about this, and I figured maybe it was the little girl spirit in Robert, and maybe she was with me and didn't realize I was going on vacation. And then she was stuck in all these strange places and wanted to go back to the museum and wanted to go back to the museum. And that's why all the stuff was going wrong. So I asked Joe, I said, do you think it's the little girl? And she says, oh, no, it's an earth elemental. No, I knew about elementals, but not a lot, you know.
Right.
So I look up elementals, earth elementals, and I read that they were first written about by Paracelsus. It was like an alchemist or a scientist, and he wrote about them in the Black Forest of Germany. And that's where Grimm's fairy tales took place.
Yeah.
And elementals, earth, wind, water, fire, they're the spirits of those elements. And an earth elemental would be wood, like a tree. And I started thinking about that, and I'm like, whoa, wait a minute. Robert is stuffed with Excelsior, wood. He's stuffed with
Yeah.
tree. And then I looked up where the Steiff company would likely have sourced their Excelsior, and it would have been the Black Forest in Germany.
We did a whole show about it, actually, on Spirit Switchboard, the Black Forest in Germany and the Grimm's fairy
Did you?
tales. Oh, yeah, it's fascinating. And it's fascinating how the paranormal has rippled out from the folklore and reality, that mix of, right?
Yeah.
Denise is saying fascinating.
I thought it was so interesting because here we have this enchanted forest, and when I realized that Robert's core spirit is an elemental from the Black Forest or from the Enchanted Forest, and then you look back at the earliest things written about him, because there were a couple of articles written before I got involved, and he was always described as the enchanted doll. So it was right there in front of us the entire time, but still it took almost 30 years for me to figure that out.
Interesting.
And it's there's some really weird stuff too, because my kindergarten teacher got me into ghosts, and I started noticing all these Pennsylvania German connections with everything about Robert. Gene Otto's grandfather moved from Germany to Pennsylvania, and then the military brought him to Key West. Robert's second caretaker, Myrtle Reuter, she was up in Pennsylvania. She married, and she had German ancestry. She married a guy from Philadelphia with Pennsylvania German ancestry, and the military brought them to Key West. His dad was selling trailers to the military. And then my great-great-great-grandfather, the first David L. Sloan, he was in Philadelphia. He married a German woman in Harrisburg, and then he was in the Pennsylvania 47th in the Civil War, and that brought him to Key West. So
interesting. So do you feel that they can tap into you and bring, like, that Robert chose you on some level? He has chosen and pulled you. Like,
yeah, I've no doubt. I was in Key West almost 20 years when I found out about the first David L. Sloan's connection. The Pennsylvania 47th Volunteers built the fort that Robert the Doll is in. I mean, what are the chances of that? And then
That's
Tom
wild.
Hambright, the librarian, who is the only reason that I'm here, his
Yeah.
ancestry, Pennsylvania German. Daryl Meyer, who owned the artist house,
Yeah.
who first told me about Robert, Pennsylvania German. And
Yeah.
I identified 30 people. The guy who got me to come to Key West, I was going to go to Charleston to start a ghost tour. And my friend Greg Hummel called at just the right time and got me to Key West. So I made a list of all these Pennsylvania German connections. And the first one was my kindergarten teacher, Mrs. Uberseeder. And so I tracked her down a little over a year ago. And I said, this is going to sound strange, but I take care of a haunted doll. And I need to find out why you started telling us about ghosts. And
Because
she told
that's
me,
kind of outside of the box to start
yeah,
talking about ghosts. Yeah.
yeah. And especially to kindergartners. And she
Yeah.
told me that her and her husband were in this farmhouse in Pennsylvania, built on a Native American burial ground. And that she woke up one night because the squirrels or something was going crazy behind the walls. And when she got up, she saw this circle of light on the wall with a line going down through it. And she looked at it and thought, well, that's weird. There were no street lights. So she got up to see if there was a car, put her hand in front of it. It was in the wall. And she thought, oh my God, the wall's on fire. And she put her hand up to it, but it was cool to the touch.
Wow.
And then she woke up her husband and she said, look at that. He looked at it and he said, I don't know what that is, but I want nothing to do with it. And he went back to bed. And then she said it disappeared and the squirrels got quiet. And that's when all the paranormal activity started. I looked up that symbol after I spoke to her. And the first thing that came up was the Irminsul, which was a sacred tree in Germany that the pagans worshipped. Now,
Amazing.
Charlemagne wanted to force Christianity on all the pagans, so he cut down the Irminsul and built a church out of it. And there was a string of I think there were many Irminsuls, many trees that were worshipped, and people fighting for Christianity would cut them down and build a church. But the first ruler of the Holy Roman Empire is Otto the Great, who Jean Otto's sister made a great point of mentioning that they were direct descendants of Otto the Great.
Amazing.
So we've got something going on where I don't know exactly what it is. Is there still this battle going on between, the worship of nature and the forced Christianity? I mean, all this stuff is mind blowing.
Yeah.
And Charlemagne's my 40th great grandfather. I mean, he's a lot of people's 40th great grandfather. You go back that far. It's not that rare. But I find it all fascinating, and I don't understand it yet. But there's definitely some magic going on, and there's some enchantment going on.
Mary Jane is saying, wow, my ancestry on my mom's side is Pennsylvania German.
Mm-hmm. You're one of us.
Well, I don't know. So my great-grandfather is Otto, and he was very intuitive and gave people readings and read tea leaves and witched wells and willow-witched wells and all of that good fun stuff.
Yeah.
So I love anything with the name Otto.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And when Jean Otto's grandfather came over, he was a doctor. He probably would have been a bit of an alchemist, but when you look at the Pennsylvania Dutch, they've got something called it's like powwow medicine, and it's kind of a bit of a German voodoo, and it originated only in this Pennsylvania Dutch area. And what I think happened, I believe, and the hex symbols that you see around on the barns in that area, that's all part of it too. But what I think happened He was a doctor. His son became a doctor. I think he passed down this this Brucari is another name for it. I think he passed down these techniques of using these spells, and I think that when Emmeline Abbott's daughter was sick, she was a nanny for the Ottos. She would have taken her sick daughter or injured daughter, whatever happened to her daughter, she would have taken her to the Otto home to be treated. Please help my doctor, help my daughter.
Right.
I believe that he practiced some of this powwow medicine or Brucari, and I think she died. And I think Emmeline probably never forgave the family for that. And what we believe happened is she probably sought some type of voodoo practitioner, maybe Santeria, maybe something more of a Bahamian type of voodoo, and would have placed some type of a spell on the family. But I think the little girl spirit, I think she was enchanted by that elemental magic inside the doll. So when she died, I think that's where she felt safe. I think Jean Otto, I think the little boy was enchanted by that magic too. As children, we don't have the blinders up. As we get older, we're told these things don't exist. But I think that's what it was. And I don't think he was a crazy old man, talking to a doll. I think he never stopped seeing this elemental magic. I think he never stopped taking care of his friend. And
Right. I think, but more people are being open to that. Do you not find as people are becoming more consciously aware of the other side and tapping in and tuning into it, do you find the visitors changing, or are there more people?
There are more people who are afraid to see Robert now. I mean, a lot of people.
Social media?
A lot of people, yeah. A lot of people won't even go there. They're like, "Oh no, I'm not risking that." A lot of people think they're going to be cursed by the devil if they go up there, so they won't even enter the museum.
Really?
So it's been a very interesting shift.
So this helps, being able to tell from your perspective and your relationship that you have with Robert, being able to negate some of the misunderstandings.
I don't know if it helps or not, but I feel like it's part of the path. I mean, I've realized one of the cool things. So when I went to Germany to try to, I visited all these sacred trees. I planned my entire vacation around these sacred trees and there's something called a kobold in German folklore. And a kobold is an elemental spirit. Oftentimes they live in mines, and they're described as pranksters, helpful, but if you cross them, then you're screwed. And
Right.
the miners used to blame them because they think, oh, we're going to score some silver here. And then if it turned out to be worthless silver, they blame the kobolds, and that's how cobalt got its name.
That's interesting.
These kobolds are also hearth spirits. And in the home, once they've adopted a family, they'll live by the fireplace. And it's kind of cool because my kindergarten teacher had 2 stories about these bricks that they got in their fireplace that words or images appeared on. And one of them looked like a kobold. Like really wild stuff. But when we went to Germany, we spent an entire day researching kobolds. And we went to 2 caves. One of them was in the middle of a forest, and there's a river running through this cave. It was very narrow. We had a guide who took us through there. And that's where they said all the kobolds used to live. And that, they got very angry at humans because one tried to trick them and stomped them. They wear little red hats like Robert used to have, and they're invisible as long as they have their hat on. So if you take their hat, they become visible. So after this entire day of searching for kobolds, we went to a random restaurant. My wife picked really good restaurants. It was, I think, a 1,300-year-old medieval tavern. And we waited for a table. And when they sat us in a fireplace in this giant hearth. And for kobolds living in these giant in a hearth. I've never in my life been seated in a fireplace to eat. And it was one of those things. It was a nod from the universe saying, "Hey, what you're doing is right, and we're paying attention." So I
And
thought that was pretty amazing. Another thing that I did,
that's the story, right? Like there's the research and the historical research that you've done makes the story even that much more fascinating.
yeah, yeah,
It does make you see Robert from a different perspective.
yeah, and I have no doubt, I mean, I think this was all predestined for me, and I'd like to think I'm in control or that things I do make a difference. I don't think they do. I show up and I do what I do, and I think there's already a plan, and I don't know what my role is in it, or maybe it's to let me know that about what is out there, and all these things around us. Something kind of cool that happened. Two cool things. Uh, I tried to get the elemental spirit in Robert to come into a doll that I made, and I offered to take it back to Germany. There's something called an Alruan, or Alruan. I might be pronouncing that wrong, but it's basically a root doll. And there was always this legend about Robert. They said that Gene's grandfather gave him the doll, that he bought it on a boat from the Dry Tortugas from a man who made those kinds of things. But the problem is Gene's grandfather was dead before Gene got the doll. So we know that's not true. But these Alruans, during the Civil War, these spirit dolls, they would have been protectors to a degree. And it's something that I could see him buying because there were a lot of Germans. The Pennsylvania 47th was almost all Germans, Pennsylvania Germans. And so I think he might have bought this doll that had the spirit. And the custom was when you die, it gets passed to your youngest son. So his youngest son was Thomas Otto, Gene's father. Thomas Otto's youngest son was Gene. Gene didn't have any kids. Closest thing he had to a kid was Robert. So what if
Right.
this entity went into the doll? We did a little seance there during the paranormal weekend, and I invited the doll into this box, into the doll that I had made. When I did it, something shot straight through the box and into me, and I totally freaked out. I mean, I've dealt with possession before, and it's terrible, and I'm terrible at protecting myself, and I just felt so stupid at that moment. I'm like, oh Jesus, I let it happen again. And Dustin Pari was there, and he
Mm.
knew what was going on. And Dustin takes the very religious approach, the very Christian approach, and uh, and he immediately saw what was happening, and he kind of regrouped everybody, and he had everybody hold hands and did this thing. He took that spirit right out, and he had something dissipate, and I was like blown away and forever grateful to Dustin. But then with that box, I don't know if there was anything in it or not, but I took it to the Black Forest with me. And in the middle of the night, I walked out deep into the Black Forest and I found a spot and I buried it there. And the Black Forest is called that because it's so thick and it's so dark. And the moon was almost full, but you couldn't see your hand in front of your face. So I had lights and everything. After I buried it and asked the forest to take care of it, and I said, if there's anything here, please welcome it back as your own. And then I started walking out. I was walking for maybe 10 minutes when I realized I didn't have my flashlight or my headlamp on, and I could see everything. I mean, I wouldn't have died if I had fallen off the path, but it would have been an uncomfortable roll down a pretty long
Right,
hill.
right, right.
And
Crazy.
and and then I started opening my eyes and closing them to try to see if I had them mixed up, and I could see everything both ways. So I did a few tests, and I'm like, this is really weird. And then I
Love it.
walked out of the forest with no lights. And when I
Love
did emerge from the forest, the moon, like I said, was like a gibbous moon, almost full. And there was this big field of wheat, I guess. I mean, it looked like this beautiful blue. And I said, I'm going to lay down in that. And I went and I laid down in this field, and I'm looking up at the moon, and then this white line appears in the sky, and it goes across and it connects to the moon, and it made that symbol that my kindergarten teacher talked about. And
Interesting.
it was an airplane. I mean, it was an airplane leaving a trail. But, to be out there at by this time, it was probably 12:30, 12:45, in the morning, and just to see that symbol, it was another one of those things like, wow.
Synchronistic.
Yeah. And then my,
I think
uh
can I talk I just want to talk about your experience with the box for a second. I think that when we protect ourselves, like if we do that protection, especially if you're going to be doing an investigation, you can almost prevent something from happening as well too. So if you're understanding what the potential outcomes can be, and I think it was great. You had that experience and Destin was there and he knew how to deal with it. So again,
yeah,
the universe had your back and it was a
yep,
good learning moment for everybody that was there.
yeah, yeah, 100%.
You were going to share something. Sorry, I interrupted.
Oh, so that symbol, well, my 6th great-grandfather was a clockmaker in Germany, in the right outside of the Black Forest. So we went to the town where he used to be, and we came across an antique shop, and I said, "Oh, I want to get a clock in this town," the town where he was. And we go to the antique shop. They must have had 100 clocks, and so I'm looking around and trying to think of one that'll fit in the suitcase and everything that works. And there was one that really stood out to me, but it didn't have a price on it. So I circled a few times, and then I'm like, "Ah, screw it! I'm going to get this one." And so we walked up and asked how much it was. It was pretty cheap. It was like a $30 clock. And when we got outside, I went to look to see if there were, any brand on it. And underneath there was a flaw in the brass. Well, not a flaw, but there was something in the brass that was not intended. And it was that circle with the line going through it.
So there's your symbol, right? Like you just know what
Yeah.
to look for and you're on the right track.
Yeah.
That's when you know everything's in alignment.
Yeah.
Love it. With can we come back to I guess the history and the timeline? Are there other areas where there is misinformation that you would like to correct or
Robert's not the inspiration for Chucky.
oh, that is very widespread.
Yeah. Yeah. That one's never going to die either. But I mean,
No.
there's interviews with the guy who created the movie Child's Play and that entire franchise. And he's come right out and said, no, Chucky is based on the My Buddy doll, the My Buddy doll and blatant consumerism. So, so that had nothing to do with Robert, but again, it's one of those stories that's never going to go away. And I've gotten to the point where I stopped correcting people because I talk to a lot of people who they'll tell me that I'm wrong. and so people want to believe what they want to believe, and I understand it because I find with key lime pie, it's the same thing. People like the key lime pie that they were raised with, the one that their grandmother or their mother made. That's their pie, and everybody else is wrong. And I think
don't you have a book about key lime pie?
But yeah, I do. Yeah, I'm the world's leading key lime pie expert too, as far as the history of it. How's that for weird? So,
love it. Oh, here we can.
But so I get people being attached to the legends because for a lot of people now it's a part of their childhood, and they don't want to be told that something in their childhood wasn't real. But hey, Cindy. So I think. So I totally get it, when people want to believe what they want to believe. And I think with Robert the Doll, what he'll do is when somebody comes in there, if somebody faces Robert and wants to get involved with Robert, it is like a fairy tale, and he'll take you into the forest and take you on a journey. And he'll really tailor the journey for just what it is that you need. And if you make it out to the other side, then you come out a much better person.
Would you encourage people to be open-minded that they are potentially connecting with Abby or the elementals as well too? Like not to stay attached to just Robert?
Yeah, so I think understanding that there's multiple entities is very important, and I think it makes a lot more sense then, because picturing this doll as being just a single living entity, um, that has a very different perception. And once you realize that it's more of a vessel for all of these other things, then it seems to make a lot more sense. And then I think that when you realize you're dealing with a whole bunch of different energies, I think that can make you feel comfortable with some of them and make you realize that you need to be a little wary of others. Um,
That's
so, so, so that's the
this is
good
true.
thing. Yeah, and
Um,
with Abby, I don't know how much time she spends at the museum and how much time she spends with me. I keep the doll with me most of the time and try to nurture her, and I'll bring her up to the museum a lot, in case there's a back and forth. And I don't really know, maybe I am crazy, but I like doing this because I really wonder what was daily life like for Gene Otto. Was he spending all of his time with Robert and having conversations all the time, or was it something that he'd go to in times of need?
right.
Because I think spirits can transfer. I've been very fascinated with spirit transference, and and I think you know, there's no reason Abby doesn't need to be at the museum to transfer it back into Robert the doll. I think this is a spirit where now that I have the connection, I can call her into the vessel, and it's a much easier transference.
Right.
But those are things that I'm experimenting with. I love doing the experiments. I love testing things out, and it's been a 30-year journey. Um,
Well, it's how we're going to understand. And I think for some of it, we're not ever going to know all the answers until after we pass. I don't think we are meant to know all of the answers. We have to keep some of it a sense of wonder, right? It keeps us. It's a rabbit hole that we go down, and those of us that are weirdos and passionate about it, we get to meet and talk about it. And I don't think that we're meant to know all the answers
Yeah,
while
and it's
we're
fun
living.
to explore it. I think maybe quantum science will end up explaining it all one day. It'll explain the paranormal, the religion, all of these all of these things that converge, and maybe make some sense of it. But but like you said, I don't know that we're meant to understand.
Yeah, I just so I guess that's part of it, right? Maybe part of what we do is to help encourage or inspire people to have that sense of wonder as well
Yeah,
too.
yeah, yeah. My friend Sydney Plume is on. She's a medium who's helped me numerous times with Robert the doll. Back
Mhm.
a few of the time we became friends during one of the times I was having problems with Robert. So she understands him quite a bit. And I see there's a question, where is Robert currently? Yeah, Robert's at the Fort East Martello Museum in Key West. And it's a
Yeah.
really cool museum, old Civil War fort.
So I just wanted to bring this up for you as well too. Randy is saying David's Key West ghost tour was the first one we had ever been on with our family, and it was so good we've been hooked ever since. We also have a
Awesome.
signed we also have a signed copy of David's book,
Awesome.
Ghosts.
Thank you, Randy.
And we do for those people who are listeners, because we are 80% listenership as well. It is ghostkeywest.com, and you can find the tours and information, and there's links for the books there's as well too, right?
Yeah, yeah. Phantompress.com. Like, people can do autographed books on there. There's Heidi. Hi, Heidi.
Yeah, he was just on the Gateway podcast with CL
Yeah,
on Tuesday
yeah,
night.
yeah. We were talking about how Key West killed JFK.
I know. So you're welcome to come back, and we can have
Aaron.
that discussion as well too.
Yeah, that would be fun. So, a couple of other legends that I'll dispel. A lot of people think that Robert lives with Zach Baggins at his haunted museum in Las Vegas. That's because Zach did a show when he opened his haunted museum. He flew Robert the doll out there. So Robert did appear for one of his first episodes, but Robert was only a guest at the museum. He doesn't live there. So that's one of them. Another one that I've seen resurface is that scientists have learned that Robert the doll has real human hair and it continues to grow and turn lighter as he ages. No,
Right.
not true. Not true at all. That one had been floating around before and it's resurfaced. Not true at all. His hair is mohair, which is like, it's made from very fine materials and it's very soft, but it's not
Right.
human hair. And if anything, Myrtle Rooter used to sit him out on the front porch, and that's when the termites got to him, and that's when he got some of the aging because the Key West sun is pretty harsh. So the sun and the salt air that faded Robert's hair a little bit and aged him some, as it does all of us.
What? Oh, does it? Do his eyes move, or they
So
change?
people talk about like Robert winking. He doesn't wink. His eyes change. What I find happens for me when I've seen Robert come alive, a lot of people, they'll see his foot move a little bit. They'll see his chest move in and out like he's breathing. He threw the lion on his lap one time. He threw that at a drunk person. He doesn't like drunks. But when his eyes change, you'll be in his presence and you can tell, when you're in a room and somebody walks in behind you and you can feel it without seeing them.
Mhm.
He has a very clear presence. And what I've noticed is when his eyes look dull, when there's no spirit inside of him, and when that spirit goes into him, it's almost as if his eyes take on a gleam where you can
Mm.
see there's something in there. And the movement that people talk about, I believe that when the spirit's entering Robert, it's like it comes in from the side and boom, there's that brief moment when the spirit world and the physical world collide, and that creates that illusion of movement.
Right.
And that's what I think most people are seeing when he comes alive. I think one of the spirits takes great interest in that person and boom, they pop into the vessel. And
Right.
so I think that's most of the movement.
And I think our belief system, our experiences that we've had, all of that will influence how we experience Robert as well too. Like what we are bringing to the table will also have that.
Yeah. Yeah. Mohair is goat hair. Yeah. I'm reading the comments
Mish.
there. Yeah. So, yeah. And it's cool. I was talking to one of the Steiff experts. They had their own goat farm, so they could control the quality of the mohair that they got. Thank you for pointing that
Cindy.
out. I was going to say goat, and then I'm like, wait a minute, it might be some other kind of animal.
Yeah, no, yeah. Mish is on that stuff.
Yeah, that's
Um,
really good. Thank you.
and Cindy, actually, if I can ask a question for Cindy too, do you feel that same sense that that the doll itself is a portal or a doorway for other spirits, not just the elementals?
Yeah, and other spirits at the museum. There are lots there. Yeah, with the ghosters, we say 42 spirits. There's so many more. There's so many
Right.
more. But it would sound ridiculous saying hundreds of spirits. But there is incredible energy at that place.
Thank you. Thank you, Cindy, for responding. Um, Sandy's asking, would it be certain people's energy that Robert senses? I
Um,
believe they can pick up on us before we go.
yeah. Yeah, I think they know energy. What I find with spirits, like if there's someone who's going through a divorce, a lot of times like a ghost who had been through a divorce attaches to them. I've seen it, where there's almost similarities, and I think it's almost like they match certain elements of our whatever our impression is, our DNA, our spiritual DNA. I think they can
Mhm.
identify how many connections there are, and that's what they connect. And I think there's an energy transference with that too, because the spirits can't just eat a sandwich when they need energy. So they kind of rely on us and our emotions, is what I've found. So that's why laughter, anger, fear, all of these things can feed them. And I think
Yeah,
that's why they'll be around when those things are present.
that's when we do, I love hosting seances. I love doing the seances. The seances are a blast. And it makes a difference when you raise the energy in that space by laughing or playing music and I will play music all day long in my space before I have the guests come and we do the seance, but you're raising that frequency. And I do the seances all the time in the room with my two haunted dolls. And I just keep it nice and quiet and don't let people know that they're in there and just see what
Oh
happens.
yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
that's so cool.
Yeah.
I want to know more about your seances.
I love them. They are my drive. There's a few people in the chat that have been actually.
That's
Music
what I
is
want.
spiritual.
That's what I
Agreed.
want to do. I want to go to one of your seances.
Carrie is sharing, yeah, I can imagine it's a soul fractal playground, the museum. They will
Great way
draw
to
to places
describe it.
that they feel safe if everyone is caring to them.
Yeah.
With a portal, though, you don't always have control about what's coming through and what isn't. And if you aren't educated about how to handle elementals, then things can go sideways.
Yeah. And I think that there's the two dark shadows that I talked about, like the 8 foot tall ones. I feel like they're kind of like the gatekeepers of the portal. And I think they
Mm.
control which spirits can come out. So
Oh,
I don't think anything comes or goes without their say so or their approval.
right. And again, depending on what your experience is and where your healing journey is, um, energies that can feel scary to some people are really just coming in as protectors, right? Like, and it's your experience and how you're perceiving them as something that is dark or evil. Like I've had energies come in that feel very heavy for some people, but I understand the why they feel heavy, right? Like it does. I think our healing journey plays a factor in
Yeah.
how we receive that.
Yeah.
Agree with David on that. So just closing, just being mindful of our time. Um, Last things that you'd like to share about Robert or what you have going on. The book. I know that we kind of mentioned that really quickly that you're on Seattle show, but anything
Yeah.
that you'd like to share?
Well, if you come to Key West, you definitely want to see Robert the Doll.
Yes.
There are dozens of ghost tours out there. Everybody thinks that the trolley is the only one because that's what they see. But the trolley used to go to see Robert, but they don't. So go to Ghost Key West if you want to see Robert. But I created a website. It's hauntedkeywest.com, and what that does, it's kind of a haunted directory for Key West. It's got haunted hotels, haunted restaurants, haunted bars, haunted museums. It's got everything. So I'd say start there. And that's going to help to get you the real good paranormal experience when you're on the island. And then I do something at America's Most Haunted Firehouse, which is cool. And we started doing UFO tours too, which is fun because there's this really cool UFO history in Key West.
I saw that. And I have a question about the cemetery beach.
Yes.
So there's no, when you click on it, nothing happens. So is
Yeah.
it coming? It says Cemetery Beach 2027 on the website.
Yeah. So
I
that's
love
what we were
cemetery.
working. That's what we were working on. And the
Yeah.
beaches in Key West are original burials from the southernmost point all the way down towards the East Martello. So almost the entire south side of the island. Um, we're talking graves all over. We used to bury people in the sand dunes back when Porter's Pirate Squadron was down here. And then storms would wash them away. Individual settlers would be buried there when there was a slave ship. There were people being sold into slavery, and the ships were captured and brought back to Key West. All the African refugees were taken care of in Key West, but some of them were in such horrible condition that they died, and they were buried in a mass grave on the beach. When they needed to build the West Martello fort during the Civil War, they dug up all the graves. I mean, you look at the bodies in Key West, nobody ever gets any rest here. So many cemeteries have been washed up That's why the one we currently have is in the center of town. It's on the highest elevation because bodies just don't stay buried here.
Wow. So that's what's coming up, like what you're going to, as far as.
Yeah, right now we're working on the UFO stuff, and with the books, I mean, the JFK assassination stuff has really been my focus lately because what started as a cool history of all of the Key West connections to the assassination ended up turning up some incredible evidence,
Amazing.
supporting the conspiracy. So there's been that, and I'm still researching a lot of threads on that. And there's a missing fire chief named Bum Farto, who his ghost we encounter in the firehouse a lot. But he's the Jimmy Hoffa of Key West. February 16th will be 50 years to the day since he disappeared. And I spent several years with a friend of mine tracking down what happened, and we found out what happened. So I'm working on a 2-part book about that.
Oh, amazing. I'm
Yeah.
looking forward to it. I would love for you to come back and share more.
Yeah, that'd be great. This has been a
Yeah.
really wonderful time, and I'm so grateful for everybody in the comments section too. I've been reading through them, and so thank you all for being a part of this.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. And thank you to Cindy. So Cindy Plume in there as well too. So thank you for
Susu.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you, everybody that was in the chat. I appreciate all of you for chiming in and hanging out. Thanks for being here, David. I appreciate you taking the time to hang out. You guys, you have things going on tonight too, right? There's the tours. Is there not the firehouse?
Yeah, for Friday the 13th, we've got the tours going on at 40 East Martello with Robert the Doll. I'm going to head over there now. That tour's just about to be starting. But we do tours just about every night.
Oh, amazing.
It's never
Amazing.
a bad night to see Robert the Doll.
It would not be. We've had some Key West discussions, James and I, about going down to Key West. So you might see us in person, not in the not too far future.
That would be fantastic.
Yeah. I think it would be fun. All right. Thanks, everybody in the chat. Thank you to Joe Montaldo, our owner, Michelle DeRoche. Thank you for hanging out with me earlier, making sure things would run smoothly today, our network manager. Thanks, everybody, for hanging out. Chris Berryman is coming on next week. And thanks for listening to United Public Radio Network and the UFO Paranormal Radio Network, 105.3 in the Gulf Coast and 107.7 FM in New Orleans. You can head to uprntalkradio.com to find out more about all the shows and networks. Randy, Bum Farto. Yes, that's what we said. Have a good week, everybody. Have a happy Valentine's Day to folks if you celebrate, and happy Family Day weekend. Stay safe and warm if you celebrate that. If you are here in Ontario. Good night, everybody. Take care.